All right, back again. Again, very brief break here I took. For you, it may be a while longer, but I immediately jump right back in here. I'm trying to end this out. I'd like to go ahead and finish it. So, while it's still fresh in my mind. So we're going to look at the fourth part of chapter 3, which leads us up to the very ending, the resolution section, all right? The area that people sometimes mistake for the climax for some reason. But the area we're in today is going to be the Granger part of the book. We're really going to see a lot about him, all right? In fact, that's almost all of this section. I believe if I looked, it's 13, 14, 15 for your questions. I do have them right here, so let's look. Yeah, it's going to get us through 15. So 13, 14, and 15 should get us there, and then the last little bit will be covered in the very final video. All right. So what we learned is, as this chapter starts, Montag's just been invited to sit at the fire with these hobos who are actually a bunch of very educated men. If you look on the reading for today, we see a bunch of professors, we see ministers, we see writers. I mean, the educated people who, for whatever reason, no longer fit in this society, mainly because they're people who encourage thinking and people, being their own people and kind of advocating for things that go against the selfishness of our society. So, Montag looks at him and is like, I don't belong here. I'm not like you. And, Granger is real welcoming with him. He's like, look, man, you do. We've all made mistakes. It doesn't matter. You're one of us now because you see things. You're awoken or awakened. You know what's right. And he looks at him and he asks him a weird question. He says, what have you to offer? If you don't think you belong, let's prove it to you. What have you read? What do you know? Montag says nothing. I thought I had part of the book of Ecclesiastes and maybe a little of Revelation, but I haven't even that now. Well, the book of Ecclesiastes would be fun. Where was it? That's Granger. Here, Montag touched his head. Granger smiled and nodded. What's wrong? Isn't that all right? Said Montag. It's better than all right. It's perfect. Granger turned to the Reverend. Do we have a book of Ecclesiastes? One, a man named Harris in Youngstown. Montag, Granger took Montag's shoulder firmly. Walk carefully. Guard your health. If anything should happen to Harris, you are the book of Ecclesiastes. See how important you've become in the last minute. The thing is that in their world, and he's going to talk a lot more about this, so I'm going to sum up a lot of it, but they basically have a lot of people who are assigned, pieces of books, chapters, or books of the Bible, whatever. And now Bradbury's got the brain part of this wrong. Okay, he indicates that we all have photographic memories, and if you've seen something, that they've developed a way to kind of jar it loose and allow you to remember it. That is not true. Okay, brain science has shown that we don't all have photographic memories. In fact, actual photographic memories aren't what you think they are. Okay, but you do forget things. So that part isn't literally true. But this is fiction, guys. Come on, we don't have to worry about that. But he points to Montag and he says, you now are this is how important you are. Not that you personally are important. It's the information you contain that is important. Faber told us that's what's important about books. It's not the book. It's not the physical book. It's what's inside it. It's on these pages and how it makes us see the world differently. And he's letting Montag know you're important now because you're if something happens to this guy Harris, you're the last person alive who can take the information that's in the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, once again, Bradbury has the option of picking a lot of books. Ecclesiastes is a weird book. A lot of you probably haven't even read it, but it is an element of, I believe it's a book Solomon wrote, and it deals a lot with struggles, and it has the most famous part of Ecclesiastes is the parallelism where it talks about there's a time to destroy and a time to build, and it goes through several examples of things like that, and that's the part that Bradbury wants us to get to, but the book of Ecclesiastes is a book of a man struggling. It's not as bad as Lamentations, but there's still this element of some struggle, and there's a lot of depth in that section. But that one part, that there is a time to, and it shows opposites, to build, a time to destroy, that is the part that is going to really pay off at the end of this book. Okay? Granger goes on and he explains some more. He explains about how they've quit trying to save books. They actually keep it all in their head. And he tells him, look, he says, you can't go about doing this forcefully. This is the part I love about Granger. Now, Granger can come off like he's a little too passive, but sometimes that's all you can do, all right? Sometimes you can't Faber pointed this out. How do you take and convince people to read when they have, Bradbury didn't say this, but I'll say it. How do you convince people to read when they've got video games? If you like video games, it is very hard for me to convince you to put it down and read a book, even if I tell you how great it is. Even if you respected my opinion, it's more fun to play video games, and there's nothing I can do to change that. So Granger kind of is passive because he has to be. Okay, so let me read this part. He says, this is Granger talking. All we want to do is keep the knowledge we think we will need intact and safe. We're not out to incite or anger anyone yet, for if we are destroyed, the knowledge is dead, perhaps for good. We are model citizens in our own special way. We walk the old tracks, we lie in the hills at night, and the city people let us be. We're stopped and searched occasionally, but there's nothing on our persons to incriminate us. The organization is flexible, very loose and fragmentary. Some of us have had plastic surgery on our faces and fingerprints. Right now, we have a horrible job. We're waiting for the war to begin and as quickly end. It's not pleasant, but then we're not in control. We're the odd minority crying in the wilderness. When the war's over, perhaps we can be of some use in the world. So all he's saying basically is we have to wait for society to collapse, and then we have to try to rebuild it. And that's scary. See, this is what dystopian literature wants us to learn. We don't want to get to this point, but guys, there is a point you get to where you cannot fix a system. It is so broken, it has to be burned to the ground to be fixed. And you don't want to get to that point. We want to fix it beforehand. I used this example earlier. It's like with a car. It starts having problems. You can keep driving it, but eventually it's going to get worse and worse and worse to the point of where you have ruined this. And no amount of money is going to repair that. So that's the situation we have right here, okay? Y'all give me 2 seconds. This is my wife, and I want to let her know you're going to get a video. You're going to get this on video, okay? Hey, can I call you right back? Okay, bye. Sorry about that. I didn't want her to think something was wrong, okay? So he says, we have to wait for the world to end. And then Montag asked the question that you should ask. He says, do you think people are going to listen when the world's ended? Because remember, him and Faber had that conversation that people aren't going to listen. And Granger doesn't say something like, oh, well, we'll make them listen, because you can't. This is what he says, and I love this. And it's so passive, but it's so right. He says, if not, we'll just have to wait. We'll pass the books on to our children by word of mouth and let our children wait in turn on the other people. A lot will be lost that way, of course, but you can't make people listen. They have to come around in their own time, wondering what happened and why the world blew up under them. It can't last. He points out that you cannot force people to listen. You have to wait for them to be at the right point. And guys, that is good for what they're talking about in here, but in life in general, all right? It's so funny for me to watch, not funny, ha. It's interesting to watch students, come to, whether it's because they become Christians or they get off to college and they completely start to see the world differently. And they're like, I can't believe no one will understand. And they get angry. You see this on Facebook now. People are like, why can't you see things my way? And they think if they yell loud enough and they throw a bunch of stats up there that you have no choice but to believe. But it doesn't work that way. People have to be open to listening to you. And you don't get that by screaming and yelling and acting like the biggest jerk on the planet. You will never convince people to listen to you or even give your way of thinking any kind of credence if that's how you go about doing it. And Granger says we can't force people. We have to wait till they need it, and then we have to be there and ready to give it to them. All right? It's a really powerful section. He points out that there are thousands of them throughout the world right now. Some of them are in areas of the world that no war will ever touch. He says, and one day we'll take what we've got. We won't have it all. We're going to lose a lot. And he says, if no one will listen now, we're just going to pass it on to our children and let them be the receptacles for this information. And then we're going to keep going, and then eventually we're going to have enough where people are going to want it, and we're going to be able to help them. But we have to wait on them. You cannot force people to believe. You cannot force people to care. All right? Great lines. All right. The next big Granger part happens, and this is a really important part plot-wise. As they're walking, Montag points something out that's bothering him. Montag says, it's strange. I don't miss her. He's talking about Mildred. It's strange. I don't feel much of anything, said Montag. Even if she dies, I realized a moment ago, I don't think I'll feel sad. It isn't right. Something must be wrong with me. So he's realizing right now that if Mildred dies, which if the cities are bombed, she's probably going to die. She's probably in the city. He's like, I don't think I'll miss her, and that makes me feel bad. And Granger starts talking about something that seems to have nothing in common with that. It feels like, Granger just does this, well, let's talk about something else, and he just kind of changes the subject. That's not what he's doing, okay? Such a powerful section here. Granger says, when I was a boy, my grandfather died, and he was a sculptor. He also was a very kind man who had a lot of love to give the world, and he helped clean up the slum in our town, and he made toys for us, and he did a million things in his lifetime. He was always busy with his hands, and when he died, I suddenly realized I wasn't crying for him at all, but for all the things he did. I cried because he would never do them again. He would never carve another piece of wood or help us raise doves and pigeons in the backyard, or play the violin the way he did, or tell us jokes the way he did. He was part of us, and when he died, all the actions stopped dead, and there was no one to do them just the way he did. He was an individual. He was an important man. I've never gotten over his death. Often I think, what wonderful carvings never came to birth because he died? How many jokes are missing from the world, and how many homing pigeons untouched by his hands? He shaped the world. He did things to the world. The world was bankrupted of 10 million fine actions the night he passed on. What does that have to do with Mildred? Well, we're about to find out. Montag gets it. He says, Mildred never did anything. The reason I don't miss her is because she's never done anything to miss. You know, Granger points out his grandfather who did all these amazing things, and he says, I miss him, but more than that, I miss these actions. And guys, that sounds selfish, but it's not. When someone dies, yes, you miss them, but you miss the times you spent with them. If you have a grandfather or grandmother you were really close when they pass away, it's not so much that knowing they're in the world. Some of you completely lose contact with these people, but you miss, you think of memories you had with them when your grandfather took you fishing, or when you sat and played board games with your grandma. Those things are cooking with her on a Sunday. I remember doing that with my great grandma. And those things are what you miss and you remember. And it's because they took the time to invest in you and make those memories. They changed things about the world, even if it was just through you. You're part of the world, so they changed it. Montag points out all he thinks about with Mildred's hands is her sitting there holding a cigarette. She did nothing. She's watching TV. If Mildred had never been born and never existed, the world would not have changed a single bit, except maybe Montag's house isn't burned down. I mean, that's not how you want to end your life. That's what Granger's trying to point out. The reason you don't miss her is because there's nothing to miss, and you shouldn't feel bad about that. Says Granger stood looking back at Montag. Everyone must leave something behind when he dies, my grandfather said. A child or a book or a painting or a house or a wall built or a pair of shoes made. Notice some of those are big, some of them are small, but he's like, you have to find something that you left a legacy in. He said, or a garden planted, something your hand touched some way so that your soul has somewhere to go when you die. Now, obviously, that's not, he doesn't mean literally. And when people look at that tree or that flower you planted, you're there. It doesn't matter what you do, he said, so long as you change something from the way it was before you touched it into something that's like you after you take your hands away. And guys, maybe my favorite line in the book. He says, the difference between the man who just cuts lawns and a real gardener is in the touching. The lawn cutter might just as well not have been there at all. The gardener will be there a lifetime. So he takes gardening and a lawn cutter, which are the same thing in a lot of ways. He says one of them, there's a different connotation. One of them's a creator. One of them's somebody who just is a janitor. So he points out that our goal, and this is what we're going to look at when we do get to some writing later, which won't be for a couple of weeks, so relax. But the point is that we need to leave something behind, some sort of legacy. And it can't always just be, well, I had kids and I raised them and that's it. If you did a bad job of raising them or you were a burden on them and not a blessing, that's not the same thing. I mean, we have to think about, and we have to plan this out. We have to think, what legacy do I want to leave so I can work towards it? And to be honest with you guys, a lot of things you do aren't going to be part of that. So you need to think, does this really need to be part of my life? All right. That's the big thing we all need to learn is look at what's my goal, end game. What do I want to leave this world? And is this going to help me achieve that? And if it's not, do I need to be doing it? Especially, is it going to hurt me getting to this point? Then you definitely don't. All right. Granger ends by talking about some V2 rocket film, but really that whole last big section is just showing that his grandfather impacted him. He says, and he even points out, he says, you can look at the ridges of my brain and see his fingerprint there. Of course, not literally, but he means that I'm a mixture of my grandfather. The way he's poured into me is now part of who I am, and that's what we need to do, and that's what Mildred didn't do, okay? At that point, Montag says, look, and then what you left off on, what you should leave off on is, and the war began and ended in that instant. I kind of try to find a cliffhanger spot to end you on where what happened? Well, bombings happened. And then tomorrow or the next video I make, which I probably won't get to until tomorrow, there's only a few pages left, we're going to see what happened. And guys, I'm not going to lie to you. It's not got a great ending, okay? Montag and them aren't killed. Don't worry. But really, you're left kind of like, what goes on from here on? But the point is that wasn't what Bradbury was worried about. He wasn't worried about that. He was worried about what led up to this point. He's not trying to tell the story of what happens after the war. He's trying to tell us how the war happened and tell us what we can do to not end up in this situation. Okay? All right. Right at about 14 minutes. Good stopping spot. Hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. I will be back in probably later tonight or tomorrow. Of course, it won't make a difference to you. All these videos are going to hit at the same time. But I will have the rest of it out to you soon. Thank you again for taking the time to watch these. I appreciate it. I hope you're learning things. I hope it's making this easier for you. All right. Thank you guys. I'll see you in the next video.